No matter how educated, talented, rich, or cool you believe you are, how you treat people ultimately tells all. Integrity is everything. Greetings of the day to all my dear students. I hope that you all are in good health. Hello everyone, this is Shreya Jadhav and I welcome you all to my e-learning channel. And today we are going to do English Grade 9 Supplementary Reading 6 Weathering Storm in Erasama, written by Harsh Mandar. So, before starting with the reading and explanation of the chapter, let us know something about the author. Harsh Mandar was born in Shillong in the year 1955. He is a writer and social worker. He has worked as an IAS in the states of Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh for almost 2 decades, mainly as the head of the district governments of tribal districts. He was awarded the Rajiv Gandhi National Award for Peace Work and the MA Thomas National Human Rights Award. Introduction for answer. Dear students, always remember that we are supposed to start our answer with introduction. This creates a good impact. Prose. Prose name Weathering the Storm of Ursuma. Author's name Harsh Mandar. Genre short story. Summary. It is a description of the brave acts of courageous boy named Prashant. He guided the victims of a flood. Summary. Now we shall start with the summary of the chapter. Weathering the storm in Ursima is a description of brave acts of courageous boy named Prashant. He guided the victims of floods who gathered at the Red Cross shed in his village in Orissa. He mobilized each person of the community to help one another. This lesson tells us the importance of the young segment of the society. They can get together and work for the community during the natural calamities. They can help, guide, and save the community with medicines, care, material, and food. The value of the young is recognized at the time of need. Prashant visited one of his old friend's house in Ursima. In the evening of 27th October 1999, there came a superstorm. The black storm gathered there. Heavy and continuous rain filled the darkness. Trees were uprooted. Everything was destroyed. Prashant was very worried about his family in the village. He did not know what had happened to them. He decided to go back to his home. He started his long journey to his village. On the way, he found two friends of his uncle. They were also returning home. On the way through, they pushed away the dead bodies of children, men, women, and skeletons of animals. Finally, they all reached Prashant's village. Prashant's heart froze up to see water everywhere. At first, he met his maternal grandmother at Red Cross shed. She had become weak with hunger. There was a fatal scene at the shelter. Around 2,500 people had taken shelter there. The people there had survived on green coconut. Prashant took up the lead. He organized a group of youth and leaders. Prashant became a leader of the village. He sent a delegation to the merchant and got the full quota of rice for the people taking shelter in the shade. Then he organized a team of volunteers to clean the shelter. On the fifth day of the camp, one military helicopter dropped food packets but did not return again. Then the youth task force was set up. The group deputed the children to lie on the floor. They had the empty utensils in their stomachs, but that they were able to communicate to passing helicopters that they were hungry. Finally, the helicopters dropped good quantity of food there. Prashant brought orphaned children and made a shelter for them. He asked for some women to look after them. With assistance of NGO, he started Food for Work program. He also engaged few of the volunteers to help widows to start their lives again. Even after the months of devastating cyclone, people seek Prashant's help in their days of grief. So, dear students, this is all about the summary of the chapter. Now, let us start with the reading and explanation of it. Supplementary Unit 6, Weathering the Storm in Erasama. The cyclone that hit Orissa in October 1999 killed thousands of people and devastated hundreds of villages. For 2 dreadful nights, Prashant, a young man, was marooned on the roof of a house. On the third day, he decided to go to his village. Did he find his family? Let us see. On 27 October 1999, 7 years after his mother's death, Prashant had gone to the block headquarters of Erasama, a small town in coastal Orissa, some 18 kilometers from his village, to spend a day with a friend. In the evening, a dark and menacing storm quickly gathered. Winds beat against the houses with a speed and fury that Prashant had never witnessed before. Heavy and incessant rain filled the darkness. Ancient trees were uprooted and crashed to the earth. Screams rent the air as people and houses were swiftly washed away. The angry waters swirled into his friend's house, neck deep. The building was of brick and mortar and was strong enough to survive the devastation of the wind's velocity of 350 km per hour. But the cold terror of the family grew with the crashing of trees that had uprooted and fallen on their house, sometime in the middle of night, damaging its roof and walls. So now it was the time in the year 1999 when Prashant, after 7 years of his mother's death, he was traveling to another village where his near and dear friend used to live. That village was 18 kilometers away from his village. He went over there for one night to stay. And at that time duration, there was a big roar of the storm. Everything was destroyed, and the old trees, ancient trees, were uprooted and crashed to the earth. Screams of the people as well as air in the houses and were all swiftly washed away. There were angry waters who were swirling into his friend's house neck deep. The building was of brick and mortar, which was strong enough to survive the devastation of the wind's velocity, which was almost 350 kilometers per hour. There was a cold terror of the family which grew with the crashing of trees which were uprooted, fallen on their house, sometime in the middle of the night, damaging the roof and walls. The crazed destruction wrought by the cyclone and the surge of the ocean continued for the next 36 hours. Although wind speeds had reduced somewhat by the next morning. To escape the waters rising in the house, Prashant and his friend's family had taken refuge on the roof. Prashant will never forget the shock he experienced at his first glimpse of devastation wrought by the super cyclone. In the grey light of the early morning, a ragging, deadly brown sheet of water covered everything as far as the eyes could see. Only fractured cement houses still stood in few places. So, with this destruction, Prashant was devastated. This continued for the next 36 hours. The wind speed was almost reduced by the next morning. And to escape the rising of the water in the house, Prashant and his friend's family took refuge on the roof. Prashant would never forget the shock which he experienced when he first time observed what devastation this super cyclone had made. Early in the morning there was a grey light. Everything was covered with brown sheet. The water was covered and it was of brown color. Everywhere the eyes went, everything looked brown. Only the cement constructed houses were standing in their places far away. Blotted animal carcasses and human corpses floated in every direction. All round, even huge old trees had fallen. Two coconut trees had fallen on the roof of their house. This was a blessing in disguise because the tender coconuts from the trees kept trapped families from starving in the several days that followed. For the next 2 days, Prashant sat huddled with his friend's family in the open on the rooftop. They froze in the cold and incessant rain. The rain water washed away Prashant's tear. The only thought that flashed through his mind was whether his family had survived the fury of the super cyclone. Was he to be bewaited once again? So, what happened? As they were on the terrace, they saw that there were blotted animals' carcasses and human corpses that were floating in every direction. There were even huge trees which had fallen down. Moreover, to that, two coconut trees had fallen on their house also. That was indeed a blessing in disguise, because those tender coconuts from the trees kept the family alive from starving for the several days. For next 2 days, Prashant sat over there with his friend's family in the open rooftop. They all were froze in cold and instant rain. The rainwater washed Prashant's tears also, and the only thought which was going on in his mind was whether his family had survived this super cyclone or again he was without his near and dear ones. 2 days later, which seemed to Prashant like 2 years, the rain ceased and the rainwater slowly began to descend. Prashant was determined to seek out his family without further delay. But the situation was still dangerous, and his friend's family pleaded with Prashant to stay back a little while longer. But Prashant knew he had to go. He equipped himself with a long, sturdy stick and then started on his 18-kilometer expedition back to his village through the swollen flood water. It was a journey he could never forget. He constantly had to use his stick to locate the road to determine where the water was most shallow. At places it was waist deep and progress was slow. At several points he lost the road and had to swim. After some distance, he was revealed to find two friends of his uncle who were also returning to their village. They decided to move ahead together. So now, after 2 days, as the rain stopped and slowly and gradually, now the water level was also reducing, was deteriorating. So then Prashant thought that now it was his time to go and search out for his family because he didn't knew whether they were alive or not. And gradually what happened? The his friend's family member told that he should stay with them and he should stay a bit longer because the situation was still critical. But Prashant knew that now it was high time for him to stay over there for any longer. He started his way with a stick in his hand and he searched for shallow roads. But sometimes he lost his way also. Moreover, to that, he was supposed to swim at some places because he didn't knew where exactly he was heading. But after covering few distance, he saw that he knew other two men who were his friend's uncle, and all three of them started their journey together. As they waded through the waters, the scenes they witnessed grew more and more macabre. They had to push away many human bodies, men, women, children, and carcasses of dogs, goats, and cattle that the current swept against them as they moved ahead. In every village that they passed, they could barely see house standing. Prashant now wept out loud and long. He was sure that his family could not have survived this catastrophe. So, as they were moving ahead, they saw that there were more and more destructions, more and more dead bodies of human beings, men, women, children. There were carcasses of dogs and goats and cattle, and as they were moving, they were sweeping against them. In every village that they passed, they saw that there was barely any house which was standing. And at that time, Prashant cried out very loud and long. He was sure that his family could not have survived this catastrophe. Eventually, Prashant reached his village, Kalikuda. His heart went cold. Where their home once stood, there were only remnants of its roof. Some of their belongings were caught, mangled, and twisted in the branches of trees just visible above the dark waters. Young Prashant decided to go to the Red Cross shelter to look for his family. Among the first people he saw in the crowd was his maternal grandmother. Weak with hunger, she rushed to him, her hands outstretched, her eyes brimming. It was a miracle. They had long given him up for dead. So now, eventually, when Prashant reached his village, Kalikuda, his heart went cold. He saw that there was not even a single roof or house standing. He saw that some of his belongings were mangled and twisted in the branches. Moreover, to that, young Prashant decided that he was supposed to go to Red Cross shelter to look for his family. When he went over there, he saw a big, huge crowd, and the first person which he met was his maternal grandmother, who was very weak with hunger. She rushed to him, and her hands were outstretched, her eyes were brimming as if it was a miracle, because they thought that Prashant was dead. Quickly, word spread, and his extended family gathered around him and hugged him tight in relief. Prashant anxiously scanned his motley, battered group, his brother and sister, his uncles and aunts. They all seemed to be there. So eventually, everyone came to know that Prashant was alive, and his extended family gathered around to hug him very tight in relief. And moreover to that, his brother and sister, his uncle and aunts, everything were there, and they were seemed to be all right. By next morning, as he took in the desperate situation in the shelter, he decided to get a grip over himself. He sensed a deathly grief settling upon the 2,500 strong crowd in the shelter. 86 lives were lost in the village. All the 96 houses have been washed away. It was their fourth day at the shelter. So far, they have survived on green coconut, but there were too few to go around such a tumult of people. So, what happened? The next morning, they saw that the situation over there in the shelter was very bad, and he decided that he would help. Somehow he saw that there were almost 2,500 strong crowd in the shelter. 86 lives were lost in the village, and there were total 96 houses, and all of them were washed away. And it was their fourth day at the shelter. Somehow till now they have survived on the green coconuts, but now there were no such extra to be feeded to that 2,500 people. Prashant, all of 19 years, decided to step in as a leader of his village. If no one else did, he organized a group of youth and elders to jointly pursue the merchant once again to part with his rice. This time the delegation succeeded and returned triumphantly, wading through the receding waters with food for the entire shelter. No one cared that the rice was already rotting. Branches were fallen, trees were gathered to light a reluctant and slow fire on which to cook the rice. For the first time in the 4 days, the survivors at the cyclone shelters were able to feel their bellies. His next task was to organize a team of youth volunteers to clean the shelter of filth, urine, vomit, and floating carcasses, and to tend to the wounds and the fractures of the many who had been injured. So, eventually, now what happened? He decided that now they were not having sufficient amount of food. There were so many people they were supposed to help, everyone. And at that time, Prashant, who was only 19 years old, he decided that if no one else is going to take up the responsibility of becoming a leader of his village, then he would be the one. He organized a group of youth and elders. Jointly, they went and pressurized the merchant to part with his rice. This time, the delegation succeeded and they came with the food. Although the food was rotting, the rice were already rotten. The branches of the fallen trees were gathered, and a light, slow fire was put up to cook the rice. And for the first time in the long 4 days after the cyclone, it was the first time that the survivors, 2,500 people, ate their full bellies. The next task was to organize a team of youth volunteers who would clean this all filth and urine and vomit and floating carcasses, and to treat people who were having some injuries, wounds, and fractures. On the fifth day, a military helicopter flew over the shelter and dropped some food parcel. It then did not return. So what happened that it was fifth day. Somehow they managed for the fourth day. Now on the fifth day there were military helicopters which were passing and dropping the food parcels for the people who were at shelter. But that amount was also not sufficient and they didn't return again. So for today we are keeping this till here. I hope that you all have understood it. We shall continue with the chapter in part 2 of the video lecture. Thank you for watching and have a nice day everyone.